Hi everyone, my name is Monique, and today I'm going to be showing you how to play a game called Mercurial, designed by David Goh and published by Good Games Publishing, who are helping sponsor this video. In this game, players play as mages who are attempting to craft new types of spells using various elements in order to perform heroic feats and earn prestige. This is a game for 1 to 4 players that features card drafting and dice manipulation, and it also comes with a Prodigy mode for solo play. But today, I'm going to be showing you how to play the multiplayer game. For more information regarding the game, I've included a link to the publisher's website in the description below. Last but not least, if you enjoy content like this and would like to see more in the future, please consider subscribing. And with that, we are ready to begin. So if you'd please direct your attention to the center of the table, we are all set up here for a 2-player game of Mercurial. Welcome to Valanir. Now, like I was mentioning, in this game, players play as different mages who are trying to score the most amount of victory points by casting spells, using your elemental dice, and earning various objectives in the form of heroic cards, arcanas, and prestige. And so during setup, players choose between 4 different class boards that are each asymmetric. And so here we have the Arcanist as well as the Chaosmancer. These class boards dictate your starting hand of cards called Alteration Cards, which you'll be using in order to manipulate your dice, as well as your starting class Sigil, the number of elemental dice in your dice pool, and your starting amounts of both mana as well as Acuity crystals, which are the resources in the game. Throughout the game, players can hold a maximum of 10 of each type of crystal, and they're always stored on your class boards. Now, there are additional details on the class boards that make them asymmetric, which we'll talk about later. But just as a note, for a more simpler gameplay experience, you can choose to use the opposite side of the class boards called the Initiate side, which gives all players the same starting resources. Now, in the middle of the table, we have 3 rows of cards that form a market of sorts. The middle row consists of alteration cards, which players will be drafting in order to use to convert their elemental dice, amongst other things. The bottom row are spell cards, which players will be using their elemental dice in order to take and cast. And finally, the top row consists of heroic cards, which are objectives players are trying to earn by casting their spells in order to score victory points. Now, to start the game, players should each roll their pool of elemental dice. These dice are then kept to the side of your class board and are only re-rolled during certain moments of the game. Now, the way that the game works is starting with the first player and going clockwise. On your turn, you'll choose to either do a take and play action, or when you're ready, you can choose to cast a spell combination. Choosing a take and play action allows you to take a spell card into your spell combination, or gain additional alteration cards into your hand so that you can play them to use their abilities. Now, it's important to note that there are 2 parts to this action. The take part, that allows you to take a card from the display, and the play portion, that allows you to play a card from your hand. And this can be done in any order. You can choose to take first, and then play a card from your hand, or you can choose to play first, and then take a card from the display. Now, when resolving the take portion of this action, there are actually 4 different things that you can do. The first thing is you can choose to take a skill alteration card from the middle row. These cards will go directly into your hand, and you'll be able to play them during the play portion in order to use their abilities. Now, a couple of things to note is that you have a maximum hand size limit of 10 of these alteration cards, and that includes cards that you've already played, and you gain any Acuity crystals that are on alteration cards that you take. Now, these cards are not replenished immediately, they'll get replenished at the end of your turn. The second option is you can choose to take a spell into your spell combination. Now, unlike the skill alteration cards that don't cost you anything in order to take them, spells require you to spend your elemental dice by allocating them to the dice slots shown at the bottom of the card. And so spells will typically have between 2 and 4 dice slots shown. And they each show 2 different types of requirements. There are fixed slots, which require you to spend that specific die face, and there are flex requirements, which allow you to spend either the die face or a combination of mana and or Acuity crystals. And so as an example, if I wanted to take this spell, I would be required to fulfill 2 different types of requirements. The fixed slot that requires me to allocate an earth die face, which I fortunately happen to have, as well as a flex slot, which will allow me to allocate 2 of my mana crystals to the space instead of an additional earth dice symbol. Now, one thing to note is that you can always spend 2 Acuity crystals in place of 1 mana crystal when fulfilling this requirement. But keep in mind that the difference between the mana and Acuity crystals is that after casting your spell combination, allocated Acuity crystals are discarded to the supply, whereas mana crystals will go back to your player board as a reusable resource. And I can choose to use my crystals in any combination. So in this example, had I had 2 Acuity crystals, I could have chosen to spend 1 mana as well as 2 Acuity crystals in place of the second mana. Now, when taking a spell card, the 2 leftmost spells of the row always provide a discount, either a blue crystal discount for the leftmost space, or a discount of 1 Acuity crystal for the card next to it. Now, once you've fulfilled the spell's requirement, you place the spell card into your spell combination, which will typically be beneath your player board. And it's important to keep in mind that all of your dice, as well as your crystals, will stay on the card until your spell combination has been cast. Which means I can no longer use this elemental die to take an additional spell until I've cast my spell combination. Now, in performing the take portion of your turn, instead of taking a new alteration or a spell card, you can either take all of your exhausted alteration cards back into your hand, or you can choose to recycle the leftmost spell card by flipping it face down and returning it to the bottom of the spell deck in order to gain 1 Acuity crystal. As for the play portion of your action, this allows you to play an alteration card from your hand to resolve either its primary or secondary effect. Alteration cards are divided into 2 main sections. We have the primary effect at the top left-hand corner, as well as the secondary effect at the bottom left-hand corner of the card. Starter alteration cards have a gray border along the left-hand edge of the card, and they come in 2 main types based off of their primary effect. One allows you to take an Acuity crystal or play up to 2 more alterations this turn, and the other that allows you to spend Acuity crystals in order to convert void die faces in your die pool to any of the other elements on your dice, either those that are in your dice pool or those that have already been allocated to spells. This can be a very useful effect because spell cards will only require 4 different types of elements: fire, water, earth, and lightning. Which means any dice showing the void face are typically useless unless you use a conversion such as that. And when resolving this effect, the number of Acuity crystals you have to spend is equal to 1 more than the number of dice you're converting. Now, when playing a card from your hand, instead of using its primary effect, you can choose to use its secondary effect, which is going to be the same for all of the starter alteration cards. This effect lets you trigger your class's ether flow power, which allows you to convert any number of ether die faces to a different element, as shown on your class board. As an example, the Chaosmancer class lets you convert ether into water, which means if I wanted to play this card on my turn, I would play it and exhaust it in front of me, and I would be able to convert any number of ether faces to the water face, which in this case would just be 1 die. Now, unlike the void symbol, ether can be quite useful, which you'll see later. In addition to starter alterations, certain classes start the game with class alterations that have a gray tinted edge and are very similar but are just slightly more improved, as well as artifact alterations that feature a purple edge. These cards are drawn randomly from the rest of their deck, and they all feature a variety of unique effects, which are all listed on page 27 of your rulebook. As for the alteration cards that are taken from the display, these are called skill alterations, and they feature a blue edge. There are a wide variety of primary effects that you'll see on these cards that'll typically allow you to convert elements into other ones and gain more Acuity crystals. Some effects have a cost that you're required to spend in order to activate its effect. And when converting elements, the value inside the arrow tells you how many times you can perform the conversion. Alteration cards that have an additional section separated by a diagonal line show an alternative benefit, so you'll be able to perform one or the other, but not both. On the other hand, if it's separated by a horizontal line, you can perform the bottom benefit after performing the top one. In addition, some cards feature a sigil bonus that has to do with the various sigils that you'll amass over the course of the game, as well as the starting sigil on your class board. As an example, this card requires you to spend 3 Acuity crystals, and its effect allows you to convert any number of water symbols in your dice pool to fire and lightning symbols. Then, after resolving this effect, you gain 2 Acuity crystals from the supply, plus 1 more for each green savior sigil you have. Now, on the other hand, this card has no cost or requirement in order to play it, and the effect lets you choose to either convert as many lightning symbols as you'd like to fire symbols, and if you have at least 2 blue Pathfinder sigils, you may perform the opposite conversion, converting fire into lightning symbols, or you can choose to resolve the bottom effect, which allows you to flip a die to its opposite face. Now, these are just a couple of examples of some of the skill alteration cards that you'll see. For a full list of their abilities, I encourage you to turn to page 26 in your rulebook. Now, when playing alteration cards for their primary effect, it's important to keep in mind that you must be able to resolve the entire effect from top to bottom, or else you cannot play the card. Now, the secondary effect of all skill alterations are the same. They allow you to re-roll up to 2 separate dice from your die pool and play an additional alteration card. The ability to play an additional alteration card gives you the opportunity to chain your die rolling if necessary. Skill alteration cards have a third option called a discard ability that allows you to discard 1 Acuity crystal in order to place the skill alteration card to the bottom of the deck, removing it from your own deck and gaining you 1 more take action this turn. But again, this is specific to skill alteration cards. And so as you can see, there's a lot that you can do with the take and play action. And again, you can choose to take either part in any order, either take and play or play and then take. Once your turn is finished, then you refill the display. If any skill alteration cards were taken, then you first place 1 Acuity crystal on each of the cards to the left of the empty space. And if there are several empty spaces, then you place crystals starting from the rightmost empty space. Afterwards, shift all cards from both rows to the left and replenish cards from the right. As soon as you have a few spells in your spell combination, instead of doing a take and play action, you can choose to cast your spells. Now, when casting spells, your main goal is to acquire certain objectives in the form of heroic cards, arcanas, as well as prestige tokens, which all require a certain amount of what's called ruin and restore. Thematically, ruin is a measure of how destructive your spell combination is, while restore is the opposite. It measures how curative or fortifying your spells are. Because they're opposite in nature, when calculating your spell combination, they cancel each other out. And so your goal is to have a lot of ruin or a lot of restore, or have an equal amount of both in order to reach equilibrium. In this game, there are 4 main types of spells, and the rewards are always listed in the middle of the card. Normal spells, such as this one, will always give you a set amount of ruin or restore, which in this case is 7 ruin. Other normal spells, such as this one, will give you a choice of either ruin or restore, which you get to decide when resolving your spell combination. Other types of spells include link spells that modify the effects of 1 normal spell in your spell combination, ether charge spells that provide an alternate, more powerful effect if you have at least 1 ether element, and enchantment spells that affect all of the spells in your spell combination. When resolving your spell combination, you must first assign any link spells to 1 normal spell, and if you have several, you can assign them all to the same normal spell. In this example, I have 1 link spell, which I'm going to link to this normal spell, since it provides a greater value. Then you calculate your ruin and restore values through a combination of your spells as well as any unallocated dice that are still in your dice pool. And when calculating your final values, because ruin and restore are opposing forces, you must subtract your lower value from your higher one. In this example, my link spell doubles the effect of its linked normal spell, giving me a total amount of 13 ruin, 10 from these 2 spells and 3 from this normal spell. In addition, you are required to convert any unallocated die faces to either ruin or restore based off of the chart on your class board. As the Chaosmancer, I'm required to convert both my water as well as my leftover lightning symbol to 1 unit each of restore, which I have to subtract from my ruin values, bringing me to a final total of 11 ruin. But just as a note, if I wanted to increase either my ruin or restore, I could have also spent Acuity crystals when converting my unallocated dice. In this example, we have a normal, an ether charged, as well as an enchantment spell. When resolving ether charge spells, you gain the higher value in gold if you have at least 1 ether die face, regardless of whether or not it's allocated. And if you have several ether charge spells in your spell combination, you only need 1 ether symbol in order to activate all of them. And so my total values for this spell combination are 5 Restore, since I have at least 1 Ether symbol, as well as 4 Ruin, 3 from my normal spell, and 1 for my leftover Fire symbol. Now that I have those totals, I can activate my enchantment spell, which are always resolved last. And so this enchantment spell converts all of my Ruin into Restore, times 2, which means I actually have a total of 13 Restore. Now, if ever your spell combination provides you with the exact number of Ruin and Restore, you achieve an extremely powerful state called Equilibrium. Any player who reaches Equilibrium consults the Equilibrium chart in order to determine how much Ruin or Restore they actually get to spend. First, you add your Ruin and Restore values together to convert them into a unit of measurement called Mist. Depending on how much Mist you have, you get to choose to gain a certain amount of Ruin or Restore, as well as any potential bonuses, which include Acuity crystals as well as prestige tokens. Now, each time a player reaches Equilibrium, they also gain the Mist Rune token, which gives players a free bonus that they can use on their turn. These tokens are double-sided, and when using them, you can choose which side to benefit from, and they'll allow you to perform a conversion or gain you additional Ruin or Restore on your turn. And once used, they go back to the Equilibrium board. And if a player reaches Equilibrium while another player still possesses the Mist Rune token, then they take it from that player, so make sure to use them when the time is right. Now, once you have your final Ruin or Restore values, it's time to collect your objectives. First, we have Heroic Cards. These cards require a certain amount of either Ruin or Restore, and they'll score you a certain amount of points at the end of the game. In addition, Heroic Cards will gain you 1 mana and 1 Acuity crystal each, which is one of the main ways for you to gain more mana crystals throughout the game. And some of them will also provide you with additional sigils that you can use for some of your Alteration Cards, as well as for endgame scoring. But it's important to keep in mind that you can only take 1 Heroic card each time you cast your spell combination. And unlike the rest of the display, Heroic cards are refilled immediately, making sure to add a mana as well as an Acuity crystal on top. Now, after claiming a Heroic card, if you have any leftover Ruin or Restore, you can convert them into Prestige tokens at the rate of 1 token for every 3 Ruin or 1 token for every 4 Restore. Prestige tokens turn into victory points at the end of the game, but it's important to keep in mind that you are not required to claim a Heroic card in order to convert your values into Prestige tokens. And the last type of objective that you can claim are the 3 Arcanas, which will score you a certain amount of victory points depending on the types of spells that you've cast throughout the game. Each Arcana is double-sided and randomized to start the game, and in order to claim one of these, you'll need to have the required spells in your current spell combination. In this example, this Arcana requires you to have at least 1 Fire, 1 Lightning, and 1 Earth spell. And at the end of the game, it'll earn you 2 victory points plus 1 point for every 2 Fire spells that you've cast. This Arcana requires you to have at least 3 spells in your spell combination that are improved by Ether, as well as the Ether element. And at the end of the game, it'll earn you 2 victory points plus 1 victory point for every 2 spells that you've cast that are improved by Ether. And so each Arcana will always provide you a base value of 2 victory points, as well as an additional scoring criteria that is unique to them, but only for the first player who's able to claim them. With each cast, you may claim a maximum of 1 Heroic and/or 1 Arcana and as many Prestige tokens as your leftover Ruin or Restore allows. And once you finish claiming all of your objectives, then you reset your play area. Any Acuity crystals that are on your spell cards are returned to the supply, and mana crystals are returned to your class board. Any spells in your spell combination are collected and placed into a stack next to your player area so that they can be scored at the end of the game. In addition, played Alteration cards go back into your hand so that you can play them again. And finally, you re-roll all of your dice in your dice pool. And for a faster game, the next player can start their turn while the current player is resetting their play area. Play continues this way, with each player doing either a take and play action or casting their spell combinations until the endgame trigger has been met, which is going to be as soon as one player has acquired a certain number of Heroic cards depending on player count. 5 Heroic cards for a 2-player game, 4 for 3 players, and 3 Heroic cards for a 4-player game. At that point, all players with any leftover spells in their spell combinations may cast them in turn order and claim any objectives. Then, all players go into final scoring. At the end of the game, players will score the victory points listed on their Heroic cards as well as their Arcanas. They'll score 1 victory point for each Prestige token, And finally, they'll score points for the various sigils on their heroic cards, their class board, as well as their skill alteration cards, scoring 1 victory point for every pair of identical sigils, or 1 victory point per sigil instead, for every set that contains 3 or more. And at that point, whoever has the most victory points wins. And in the case of a tie, the player who earned the most points from Arcanas wins. But that is essentially how you play Mercurial. If you have any questions about anything that you saw here today, please feel free to leave me a comment down below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you all so much for watching the video. I really hope it was helpful. If you enjoy content like this and would like to see more in the future, please consider subscribing. Thank you. Bye.